The Last of Us Part 2. I have a lot to say about this game, so for the sake of your time and my sanity, I'm going to skip the fancy introduction and get straight into what's in my mind. This game was not as bad as people in the media are making it out to be. Make no mistake, it definitely has its issues and we'll get into those later, but it was not the living train wreck that I came to expect because of all the rumors. Before playing the game for myself, I was hearing from a multitude of people and reviewers that the game was not worth a single hour of my time. In fact, after the story got leaked pre-launch, all of my friends who unfortunately let their curiosity get the better of them told me that they'd be skipping the game and advised me to do the same. And unfortunately for them, they seem to have forgotten how long I've been waiting for this sequel. Needless to say, I refused. But the fact that my friends would be willing to forego a game that they had been waiting 7 years for what seemed to be a simple story choice, was alarming to say the least. And pretty soon, articles started to pop up all over the place about how it was a literal abomination and why you should skip it. Now of course, I had my reservations because there's no way I trust IGN or The Verge for video game advice considering how little they care about putting out quality reviews, and instead either follow the mob mentality of the internet or in whatever direction their sponsors point them. All that being said, I enjoyed the game, but it was also trash, and it's going to be decently complicated to explain what I mean, but I hope you're willing to bear with me. So in this video, we're going to separate my thoughts on the game into 5 different sections and provide a separate rating for each, and at the end, I'll give you a cumulative weighted score and a final verdict. The 5 sections will be gameplay, replayability, music/sound, graphics/performance, and story/writing in that exact order. You'll find that I separated this video into chapters when you look at the playback bar, so feel free to skip to whatever part you wish, if you happen to be only interested in a single aspect of the game. I should warn you now, however, that while the majority of this video is spoiler free, the story and writing section will not be, so before jumping there, just be aware of that. I will provide another spoiler warning as we approach that specific section, so fret not if you haven't played the game yet or haven't finished it. I'll give you tons of time to skip the section and jump straight to my rating of it. But now, let's get on with the show and on to the first topic, gameplay. Alright, where do I start with the gameplay? Honestly, I'm just gonna flat out say that it was absolutely terrible. I don't understand how 7 years of thought and groundwork could have only produced a single dodge mechanic and somewhat decent execution animations. I remember watching a couple of reviews on YouTube before I played the game for myself, and a lot of them said the same negative things about gameplay. And a couple hours into the game, I had absolutely no clue what they were talking about. The gameplay seemed fine and fun to me. It wasn't anything to write home about, but the system worked and it did its job. But I quickly realized that the gameplay system's direct usability is not what wore people down. It was the repetitiveness of the level design and the complete lack of ergonomic quality of life improvements for the sake of quote-unquote realism, or simply put, being annoying to play because of realism. So let's attack those two topics separately, starting off with the level design. Like I said earlier, for the first 8 or so hours of the game, I saw no problem with the gameplay at all, and that's mainly due to the fact that I expected things to eventually change, but they never did. And you might be like, Innocence, that's not very practical, to expect the game to completely rework itself partway through, but that's not at all what I'm asking for. For the overwhelming majority of the game, and I'm talking like 95% of it, things kind of go like this. For whatever reason, you need to get from point A to point B, but oops, there are enemies in between point A and point B, and those enemies are either the infected or whatever humans who happen to not agree with you. Now, the game presents you with 2 options. Number 1, sneak around the enemy, or number 2, attack the enemy. And obviously resources are limited, so the latter option is literally never viable, like ever. So for most of the game, you're going to be forced into a single playstyle in what seemed to be Crouch Walk and Takedown Simulator 2020. And obviously that shouldn't be much of a problem, because this is a linear story driven game, and if the writers want us to play it a certain way, they have every right to do that. But to do it for 25 hours straight without an ounce of variation is not fun. After about 10 hours, the gameplay quickly became monotonous and repetitive, which really sucks because the cutscenes were always really fun to watch, but as soon as they ended and it was decided that I had to go from point A to point B again, I thought to myself, do I have to do this? Because that's how much I physically hated playing through this game. It got so bad that I had to turn down the enemy AI to the lowest difficulty so I could basically brute force my way through every location as fast as possible for the sake of advancing the story. I don't understand how the gameplay could just be so boring. It is not an exaggeration when I say that I could see half of the people who buy this game not finish it themselves simply because of how bad the gameplay was. In fact, you there, yeah, you You're guilty, aren't you? You stopped playing and looked up the ending, didn't you? But hey, I'm not gonna judge because we all do things in the heat of passion, don't we? And some of you might be thinking, oh, now he's complaining just to complain. But not really. I could think of tons of ways they could have varied the level design to keep things interesting. Instead of sneaking around all the time, why not set an ammo deposit right next to us and have us defend a location from waves of enemies? Why not have us race a boat through multiple checkpoints in a time trial to deliver an urgent package? Why not have us steal some enemy clothing and have us impersonate a soldier in order to find out some important intel? Why not have us assassinate a target from 400 meters away with a high-powered rifle? I don't know why not. Instead, my experience went like this. Hour 1, sneak and attack. Okay, sounds easy enough. Hour 2, sneak and attack. Alright, say no more. Hour 4, sneak and attack. Yep, got you. Hour 8, sneak and attack. Oh my god, dude, what the hell? Hour 15, sneak and attack. Why am I still playing this game? Oh right, the review. So let's just say that the level design was not very creative in the slightest. This level of repetition might have passed for a 12-hour game like T-Lou did in 2013, but it's unacceptable for a 25-hour blockbuster in 2020. But moving on to ergonomics and quality of life, these are two more problems that weren't very noticeable until I started to become frustrated with the repetitive nature of the gameplay. In short, the movement felt clunky, the game wasn't responsive, and the lack of a waypoint system or at least a consistent hint system was downright annoying. I can't tell you how many times I pressed the jump button only to have it not activate for whatever reason, leaving me to fall to my death. Or when I want to switch my weapon in the heat of a firefight, but being unable to because apparently reaching into your back pocket and grabbing a different gun in a twitch reaction has to be as hard as stopping, pressing right on the D-pad, holding square for a second, and now down on the D-pad. You know, all while a swarm of infected is chasing you ready to eat the meat off your I often found myself wanting to perform certain actions in the game but not being able to as quickly as I wanted. This led to a lot of awkward moments where I honestly didn't even know what was going on because I was too busy trying to properly collect myself. Oh, this is embarrassing. I'm out of ammo. You mind waiting for me to reach into my back pocket to grab another one? Yeah, man, take your time. Thanks. But there's like not a button for that? What, to switch weapons? Yeah. There is, but you gotta press like other buttons too. Like, I don't know, it's kind of complicated. Why would they make it like that? I don't know, to be realistic, I guess. Damn, buddy, sounds rough. No, don't worry about it. You're actually being really cool, so it's no big deal. But yeah, I'm ready. Like in video games, there's a fine line between realism and fun, and I really feel that Naughty Dog completely threw away a lot of the potentially easier systems of weapon management, goal orientation, and storage in favor of being as realistic as possible, which made this game feel really heavy and slow to react to your commands, which, like I mentioned, seemed more like a pointless nuisance than it did a survival game mechanic. And another big problem was a complete lack of waypoints or at least objectives in the pause menu. Like, I understand, waypoints in a game like this would be cheesy, so I'm not suggesting we implement those, but there is no reason I should be left in a situation with no directions whatsoever and having to figure out what the hell I have to do all by myself. Like, I bet the most common questions asked while playing this game were, where the hell am I? What the f am I supposed to be doing right now? And did I go the wrong way? And this really shouldn't be the case. Like, how hard would it have been for every subsection of the game to include a small statement in the pause menu like, head west over the fence into enemy territory? Like, I'm sure that would save people an infinite amount of headaches. And they should have also included an option to turn these statements off for the people who don't love themselves, because I know y'all are out there. And I know what some of you must be thinking. Oh, you just don't like puzzles, admit it, that's fine. No man, that's where I had to disagree with you. It should not be a freaking puzzle to figure out what direction I should be going in. If you really think otherwise, hey man, more power to you, but don't force your masochistic lifestyle onto the rest of us. And honestly, that's enough about gameplay. I'm going to give it a final rating of 4 out of 10 because this style really did not age well over 7 years, and Naughty Dog simply did not do enough to innovate and expand on what made the original Last of Us gameplay so fun to play through, and instead expected it to work without much change in 2020, which is what I think was their killer mistake. But anyways, on to replayability. I don't even know why I gave this its own section because replayability is heavily tied into gameplay, and I just explained how I felt about that, so let's just get this over with. Replayability gets a 1 out of 10. Why not a 4 out of 10 like gameplay got? That's because I was able to ignorantly enjoy the first 8 hours of gameplay without much notice as to how much I would grow to hate it, but on a second playthrough I would know from the very beginning, making that a full 25 hours of agonizing grinding versus the original 17 of my first playthrough. So yeah, there's not a snowball's chance in hell I'm playing this game again. But now, on to music and sound. So some of you might be wondering why I decided to say music and sound. Well, that's because I mean separate things entirely. When I mention music, I obviously mean any composed notes that appear in the game, but when I say sound, I mean any ambient sounds and the sound system as a whole, not including music. But while we're on the topic, let's start out with that, the music. I thought that in general, the music in this game was alright at best. There were only 3 or 4 pieces that stood out to me, and quite frankly, I think most others were lacking. Yeah, there were tons of tense pieces that complemented our fight scenes and sneaking around just fine, but there weren't many standout pieces that if played I could be like, yeah, this is Ellie's theme, or damn, this game is beautiful. I mean, admittedly, towards the latter half of the game where a lot of the sad things and powerful moments are actually happening, most of the scenes went without music at all, which in hindsight was probably the best call because it made me focus on the dialogue and really digest what the characters were saying. Their words hit harder because of it. But aside from this obvious design choice, the rest of the music wasn't anything to write home about. The entire score wasn't too different from the style of the original game and in fact sounded quite similar. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It is part 2 after all, but I guess most people were just looking for a deeper expansion of the music with some new and powerful notes, not just what sounded like a continuation of the first game. And that wasn't to say that the compositions were bad, they were not, but they just didn't wow me. Like, there wasn't a single song in the game that I could hear right now and automatically say, oh, I remember the scene attached to that one, except the ones that Ellie played on her guitar. All of the other songs sounded samey and didn't do too much to stand out from one another and the gaming music landscape in general. If you've played the game and think I'm crazy, I'm going to play 3 tracks for you and you tell me if you're able to distinguish them from one another, as well as tell me where they were usually due to be played. Have a listen. You see what I mean? Could you have honestly told me that the first track titled Cordyceps only played when you were up against the infected, or that the second track titled Cycle of Violence only played when someone hurt someone else, or that the third track titled They're Still Out There only played when whoever you were tracking came to your mind? These 3 tracks, in my opinion, lack personality. Or maybe they just didn't play them loud enough in the game. There's almost nothing to distinguish them from one another, especially when you're in the heat of a firefight, and tracks like these quickly led to me almost completely forgetting them within 2 days of finishing the game. And again, that's not to say that they're bad tracks, it's just the style is very minimalist and doesn't do much to stick in your head, and I don't think anyone would want to listen to these outside of playing the game, which if you've ever heard a fire soundtrack, actually happens all the time. And admittedly, I did pick 3 of the worst sounding songs in the game to show you there, but there definitely were some that stood a cut above the rest, like Chasing a Rumor. Collateral. The WLF. And Allowed to Be Happy. These songs and maybe a few others were very noticeable when they played and seemed to have a life of their own, which sadly cannot be said for the majority of the soundtrack. And I know a lot of you audiophiles out there are going to string me up for this one, but that's just how I feel. And as for the ambient / world sounds, actually not that bad at all. It was very pleasant throughout the entire game to hear the sounds of waterfalls and conversations between unsuspecting enemies, and their tones added a lot to the overall experience. I'm not gonna get super into it because it's obviously not a topic that's ridiculously interesting to listen to. Get it? Listen to? But I definitely think it was worth mentioning. My personal favorite moments of ambient sound all happened whenever I was trapped within an infected den of some sort and the howls of the zombified humans reverberated off the sides of the walls into my ears. Their screeches and clicks all added a level of spookiness and tenseness that you typically only get to really experience in horror games, so honestly, bravo. My only real gripe with the sound system is that sometimes it will glitch and quickly go to absolute shit. As in, for one reason or another, all of a sudden the game would have a hard time tracking sound sources and the audio cues would be mismatched from their actual location. Sometimes it got so bad that I would hear an enemy talking to be what seemed right up against my ear, only to turn around and see that they're actually 50 meters away from me. And this happened relatively frequently, I'd say about once or twice every 2 or 3 hours. But aside from that, the ambient sound was actually very good and pretty immersive. But enough about this, let's get on to the score. I'm giving music and sound a 7.5 out of 10, which I honestly think is a pretty fair score. If you wanted to know the individual scores, music received a 7.5 and sound received an 8 for a combined score of 7.5 out of 10, and I don't think anybody could change my mind on that. I wanted to rate the music portion so much higher as there were some pretty fire songs on the soundtrack, but I felt that a lot of the others just bogged down the good ones far too much for me to just completely ignore them in this rating, hence the 7.5. Try not to dig too hard into me in the comments. And now a lot of you guys might be wondering, what? He said he actually liked this game, what's the big deal? All he's been doing is bashing it up until this point. And you have a very valid point. Up until now, I've been criticizing the game pretty heavily and it might even seem like I'm hating on it. But that's only because the first 3 sections focused on what I thought was really weak about the game and the last 2 focused more on its strengths. So let's jump straight into them. First things first, graphics and performance. I just want to preface this by saying that I mainly play games on PC, so I never really saw the point in getting a PS4 Pro in the past since I could do all my 4K gaming on my computer. So I'm obviously still rocking that day one OG Boeing 737 PS4 from 2013. And despite that fact, this game was absolutely gorgeous. I mean, sure, I did play the game on an HDR capable display, and I didn't think it would make that much of a difference, but this game really sold me on the technology. The difference between HDR and no HDR was night and day, and playing through the game with it added an ambient feeling that emulated real life and really made the game pop, especially during the cutscenes. And even without it, the game was still beautiful, massive, and seemingly breathing right along with you, albeit a bit duller colored. But honestly, I was absolutely shocked to see this game running on 7-year-old hardware that your iPhone 11 is more powerful than. No, you heard that correctly. Your iPhone 11 is more powerful than the OG PS4, especially on the CPU side of things. And yet, despite the absolutely amazing coloring that HDR provided and the rich world with a lot of foliage and assets, the game ran nearly flawlessly. I don't know the exact frame rate, but it felt like it was locked at a hard 30 and rarely ever dipped below that. And obviously, as a member of the hashtag PC Master Race, anything below 90 FPS is usually enough to make me go blind, but for TLOU 2, the frame rate was so constant and unfluctuating that I had to give it a pass. Sometimes its rock solidness was even enough to fool me into thinking that it might actually be running at a higher frame rate, if that even makes sense. So I can't praise the graphics and performance enough, all things considered, even though there were some parts where the FPS dipped into 15 FPS territory, but again, those were few and far between. So graphics and performance, that gets a solid 10 out of 10 gold star from me. But now let's move on to the final section and arguably the most controversial, the story/writing. Okay, so here is the spoiler warning that I promised you guys I would give. There's going to be a countdown timer at the top right of your screen, and once that hits 0, this video will become free real estate in terms of spoilers. If you don't want any of those spoilers and want to jump straight to the story/writing score, go to the time code flashing on your screen right now. From that time on, there are no spoilers, and I'll just give you the score of the section and eventually the entire game, so rest easy. If you haven't finished the game, I'd recommend you skip this because trust me, even if you started it, there's probably a lot of stuff you don't know. Plus, I'm going to be discussing the ending, obviously. So I'm gonna let this timer run out and see you on the other side if you decide to skip this section. Alright guys, if you're listening to this, that means one of two things. Either you, like myself, binged TLOO 2 in under the week or so that it's been out, or you don't give a fuck. In which case, more power to you. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about story and writing. Let's talk about writing first, as in writing choices, but not so much the direction of the story just yet. If you guys remember back to when TLOO 2 got leaked, #itsmam seemed to be trending on the internet, and I mean I still don't know why because I avoided spoilers like my life depended on it. But I kinda thought that maybe Naughty Dog was gonna go the super inclusion route and make Ellie identify as a man, you know, considering that we already knew she was gay from the original TLOO DLC, as well as that infamous Kiss trailer that sent what seems like half the internet up in flames. But thankfully I was wrong, and in fact after finishing the game I still don't know what that hashtag means, so who knows, maybe the leaks were somewhat inaccurate. However, that whole thing does spark the conversation of inclusion and how Naughty Dog handled it in this game. Now, I just want to preface this by saying that everyone has a right to be whoever they see themselves being, and no one has the right to take that away from them. You know, we're all humans. Some of us might be different on the outside, but we all bleed the same color. And now that I've said that, inclusion is in your face in this game, and that's not a bad thing at all, at least for me. I see no problems with having a story including a masculine female, a feminine male, a lesbian lead protagonist, a lesbian side character, 2 Filipino siblings, a southern speaking Asian, nods to religion, a witty one-lining Hispanic, a strong independent black woman, and pretty much everything in the book at this point. So when I saw criticism online for TLOO 2 being overly inclusive, I initially thought that these people were, you know, just homophobic and needed to check their personal alignment with the universe. Because, you know, we as humans encounter a variety of different people every day, and the next guy deserves to be on screen just as much as you do, and if you think differently, you're probably prejudiced in some way. So, like I said initially, I didn't see the problem and just wrote it off as internet trolls just being angry. But as I continued to play the game along, I began to play a bit of devil's advocate, you know, put myself in the shoes of the trolls and try to comprehend why they might be behaving so irrationally. And what I found is that this game really pushes inclusion on you, but not in the way you might think. It's more of a subtle push that kind of builds up over time, and it almost doesn't feel entirely natural. Like, this game does everything in its power to constantly remind you that Ellie is lesbian and that Abby is masculine, whether it be from the ambient conversation or how they refer to one another. You're always constantly being reminded that these people are different. And like I said, I see no problem with that and actually enjoyed most of the characters very thoroughly, but I could see how that could irk certain people who just want to play the game and not want to hear about any politics. Like, I could imagine someone who couldn't care less that anybody is gay, Asian, feminine, or whatever, but just doesn't like the fact that it has to be brought up every 5 minutes. It's kind of like that awkward high school couple that made out everywhere in public and everyone would always be like, okay, we get it, you're in love, now can you do that somewhere else? Like, a lot of the cutscenes kind of went like this. Alright, so we have to get from point A to point B. Okay, say no more, we need to leave by tomorrow, but did you know that I'm Asian and gay? Okay, congratulations, but what does that have to do with anything? I don't know, I just wanted to say it. Let's fucking go, man. And again, it's not something that I personally cared about. I couldn't care less because I'm a very open-minded person who loves all types of people, but I could totally see how this push for inclusion might be a bit overwhelming for someone who wasn't as mentally prepared as me. And I also think that I'm in the majority, as in most normal people aren't gonna care at all either. But that still doesn't mean that the push doesn't exist, because let's be serious, this game really pushes it. But despite that fact, like I said, I personally enjoyed the characters quite a bit, so I think the creative choices as a whole get a huge pass from me. The characters, for what they were actually profoundly realistic and believable, at least most of the time. So if you want a creative choices / writing section subscore from me, I'd give it a solid 10 out of 10 gold star. But onto the actual story itself, which is probably why the majority of people hate this game, and I've got to say, I actually liked it quite a bit. As a person who is a fan of the tragedy genre and has read and watched more tragedies than anyone would care to hear about, the only thing that actually seemed uncalled for was Joel's death. Well, at least in the moment. I remember playing through it and having to pause the game to ask myself, is this shit actually happening right now, or is Naughty Dog smoking a loud one? And unpause the game only to find out that they actually just killed off a man who was supposed to be an integral character. I did not agree with that one bit, but I have to give credit where credit is due. The realism of the scene was never broken, and everything that happened seemed to be entirely plausible. We as the player just didn't like what was happening, but that doesn't mean in and of itself that the scene was poorly constructed or that Joel had no reason to die so early, which we find out at the end of the game that he absolutely did. So as I played through the game and learned the reasoning, I came to terms with his death and completely understood why it happened. I think the biggest mistake Naughty Dog made was not telling the player the reason off the bat and leaving it up to our imaginations, because obviously, in our minds, there is no reason for killing off our beloved main character. And that whole ordeal where we had to play as Abby for the second 12 hours of the game was actually pretty unbearable up until around halfway through Seattle Day 2, where we met up with Lev and his sister again, because honestly, it was these two that made the second half of the game playable, you know, despite the fact that one of them eventually got KO'd. Abby's half of the game was very difficult to care about throughout the entirety of Seattle Day 1. In fact, I stepped away from the game for an entire real life day because of how much I didn't care for her perspective. I just wanted to find out what the hell happened at the end of the cliffhanger just prior. Was Tommy dead? Could Jesse be saved? And what the f happened to Dina? And sadly, there was going to be a full 12 hours of what seemed to be bullshit before we could figure that out, and I feel like that's what players had the biggest problem with. And you might have noticed a trend. I don't particularly have an issue with the events of the story, but more so the structure of the story itself and the order of events. Like, Naughty Dog couldn't have chosen a worse format and order of events to tell this story. It makes it very hard for someone to want to finish the game, especially after getting slapped in the face like 5 times over. However, things did start to turn around just a bit as we entered the end of Seattle Day 2 with Abby, and we started to delve deeper into her past, and Naughty Dog began to do their best to humanize her. And I've got to say, at least for me, it worked. By the end of the 3 days with Abby, I completely understood why she was doing what she was doing, but I also feel like I should have understood that much earlier, and that Naughty Dog made a huge mistake by keeping us in the dark for so long. And the entire final arc of the game just felt rushed and like they were trying to tie up loose ends. But then again, I didn't care because at this point in the game, I just wanted to be fucking done with it. But yeah, that last arc didn't even make sense. Like, who are these people who kidnapped Abby and Lev? Why does Ellie look starved? Why didn't Ellie finish the job? And for fuck's sake, why the hell did Dina leave? I tried to avoid saying this the whole video, but god, I can't hold it in anymore. Dina is a thought. A thought. Ellie, you have shitty taste in women. I knew this from day goddamn one. I can't stand her character, and I wish Abby cut her up when she got the chance. Fucking worthless piece of shit. Sorry. Anywho, a lot of questions go unanswered at the end of the game, possibly because Naughty Dog wants us as people to reflect on them. And as someone who thinks philosophically all the time, I could definitely respect that. In fact, it was actually pretty fun for me to think about it. So overall, I don't think the story was bad. It was actually very good, just presented supremely poorly. Now, excuse me while I put in 10 seconds of filler to this video to ensure the people who are skipping past the spoilers don't accidentally skip into something they didn't want to hear. Once the timer counts down, we'll be back to the video. So overall, in my personal opinion, I'd give the story itself a solid 8.5 out of 10, and that coupled with the writing and creative choices brings a net score of 9 out of 10. So on to the final verdict. So this game had a ton of ups and downs, strengths and weaknesses, and honestly just as many things wrong with it as it had right. To me, it is the definition of a guilty pleasure, as in a game by all accounts that I and everyone else should have completely hated, but still managed to find at least a little light at the end of the tunnel. Like, overall, this game is pretty bad compared to the first one, but it's not the trash that people are making it out to be. It has its problems, sure, but we can still take a lot of things away from it. It's golden trash. A trash above the rest, so to speak. So that's why, with great confidence and taking all of my previous scores into account, I have to award The Last of Us Part 2 a final innocence certified score of 7 out of 10, wouldn't play again. And for reference, the original T-Lu sits with me at around an 8.5 out of 10 because of its terrible ending. So with that being said, I'm gonna get out of your guys' hair and let you reflect on what I've said and potentially argue with me down in the comments. I'm always down to pwn some noobs in a debate anyway. So lads, if you enjoyed the video, slap a like on it. If you didn't, slap a dislike, and be sure to subscribe if you want to see future content from the channel, and possibly hit that bell notification if you're so inclined. Anyways folks, I've been Innocence, you've been the audience, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.